And welcome to our May Grip-Birkman Coaches Cafe. It's good to see a bunch of you joining us here, and we're going to have a really great conversation this morning. Langman's going to help me as we try to throw out a little bit of stimulus for the dialogue. Our purpose here is always to try and help the conversation to take place between coaches. So we'll talk sometimes about some issues that we're facing. We'll talk sometimes about trying to get advice, maybe about some event that might be coming up and we'd like to get a little bit of help or some ideas from other people. We'll try to share best practices sometimes. And sometimes we'll be giving you some information that's happening in the Grip-Birkman community to get ready. Right off the bat, let me give a quick plug for November 1 through 3, we will be in Greenwood, Indiana for the big Grip-Birkman celebration. This will be more than just a Grip-Birkman users group. It's going to be a great time for us to share some really, really great developments that we're excited about, some new developments that are happening with the Grip-Birkman, and you'll be hearing a little bit of pre-information about that over the next few months leading up to November. But mark your calendar right now if you have not already, to do everything you can to be in Greenwood November 1st through 3rd. Registration information for that will be coming out real soon. So be watching for a note from Steve Potter about how to register for that in the next few weeks. With that word from our sponsors, we'll delve right into this morning's dialogue. Greg, help us get started talking about team building. A lot of us have had questions related to how can we do a better job in team building and what are some of the best practices in team building. Why don't you walk us through just, how do you get started and some of the things you do in a team build?
Yeah, sounds great. So, with team builds, there's obviously lots of different things that we can do. Lots of fun things we can experience together. And sometimes there's just simple practical things like how do you get this going? So I'm just going to walk you through just a little bit step by step what I do in preparing for a team build, what kind of resources I use, and walk through to the end. I'll give you a basic overview first, and then we'll walk into a little bit more detail. But if I'm walking into a team that I know or don't know, my first basic step is to lay the groundwork of expectation. So clearly lay it out ahead of time for everyone. This is how it's going to work, because I don't want people getting caught off with surprises. So I typically just send out a basic email that documents things like, we're going to start off with doing a individual coaching session with each person. It's going to be 1.5 hours to 2 hours long. I let them know that if this is being basically sponsored by their organization, that these results will be shared with their supervisor. And the reason I want to let them know that up front is, going through the Grip-Birkman experience, it's a wonderful learning experience for them, but it also reveals a lot of things that are very personal. And so I want them to know up front that this will be shared with their supervisor. I then, once I've given them all that up front there, we also let them know that we'll do a team building session. So I'll include that in my email, and the team build, whether it's a half day or a full day, I communicate that out, as well as there will be follow-up expectations. The one other thing I include is I let the supervisor or boss of the team, I let them know that I will be requiring a 1.5 hour, maybe 2 hour session with him to go over the results prior to the team build. And my reason for that is simply this. If a supervisor or the leader of the team goes into a team building session and they don't know what might be happening, or if they're not aware of certain potential issues on the team, they get caught off guard and they're less than thrilled with that experience. Mm-hmm. Most supervisors do not want to get caught off guard. So I let them know, I'll meet with them ahead of time, go over the results, and in that meeting, that 1.5 hour meeting prior to the team build, I'll walk through, here's areas that are hidden on the team, Here's areas of potential conflict that could arise during our team building session. Here's where insecurities might be. And here's some of the challenges that maybe your team has with you as your supervisor. So, because in a team build, I'm wanting people to be honest and vulnerable. I want them to go to those places that they haven't been able to go to on their own. But again, I want the supervisor to have at least a bit of an understanding ahead of time. This is where it could go. So that's all kind of my preparatory kind of work that I do. Again, I communicate all of that in an email so that it's in writing and everyone knows this is how it will work. The day of the team build, obviously you need to communicate space you need, resources you need. All those logistical things can make a big difference. I did this one team build where I failed to do that, and there just was not enough space. Now, it forced me to be creative, but unfortunately, the creativity still did not make up for the lack of space. So make sure the logistics are there, and it'll just make things easier for you. But what I'll do is I'll walk you through just a little bit more detail what I do for a half-day team build. Because what I'm finding, at least in my context here, people's lives are insanely busy. People are not necessarily willing to commit to a full day on something like this, but a half day they seem to be very open to. So in a half day team build, what I'll typically walk into is I'll do an opening, just, hey, welcome, who am I, those kinds of things, introductions around the table. But then I will do a devotional, typically around the place of significance. So I'll lead people in the first, one of our first sessions in the Grip-Birkman coaches training, talking about where our significance is in Christ. I'll do a devotional in on that, which is typically in around the 20-25 minute range. And then coming out of that as the basis, we have a time of prayer where I'm inviting people to lay down the things that are holding them from being honest and vulnerable. For me in the session, I've got these little plastic swords I found at the dollar store. I've got a red one, a yellow one, a green one, blue one. So, the whole Birkman colors thing. But I'll have them pick up their sword, and I'll talk about the use of a sword, that you can either protect yourself or you can fight people off with it. But today we want to lay down our swords, to lay down those things that are going to keep us from being vulnerable and honest and receiving and building trust as a team. So I'll lead people through a time of prayer with that. And I, as the facilitator, I lead the way. So I'll share, here's the things I need to lay down. And everyone prays that out. And the beauty of that is it gets vulnerability happening right at the beginning. It lays the foundation for how we're going to interact, which then allows us to go into the lifestyle grids. So we've done that exercise. People are now have been confessed some things, been vulnerable. And the way I typically do things, my main team building exercise is walking them through the lifestyle grid. So the training we did, when you went through the training, the floor exercise where people are standing in their grids, starting with the asterisks, diamonds, circle, square. That's what we're going to do as the main session. And that typically takes me an hour and a half to 2 hours. So, because I do a lot of dialogue while people are standing in the lifestyle grids. But for me, one of the simple things in preparation for that, and I'll take 2 more minutes and we'll wrap things up and then pass over to Larry. But what I do is I just leave 4 rolls of tape on the floor. And after we've done our devotional, just say, okay, here's 4 rolls of tape. You've got 5 minutes to go create the lifestyle grids and to label it as a team. And I just send them off. And part of what I'm wanting to do here is just I want to observe how do they operate as a team. Part of it, I'm a little lazy. I didn't want to do the work myself. So they're doing the work for me. But really, I'm getting to observe how are they interacting as a team. What are the team dynamics here? So they give them 5 minutes. It's a bit of a pressure cooker for them. But what that does gives me time to observe. And then once they've got it created, we give them 5 or 10 minutes. What did you learn about your team by doing this little exercise so far together? They learn a ton every time I do this about who they are, about their team, about their leader. And then we go into the whole lifestyle grid exercise. After the exercise is done with the lifestyle grids, which typically is in the 1.5 to 2 hour range, we do a follow-up affirmation, Q&A, and then we wrap up our time. So that would be a half-day team build. But at the wrap-up, after we've done the affirmation, I do send them out with at least one simple exercise. And the simple exercise, and we'll send you a copy of this, it's just filling out one page that says, where are you strong? Where are you weak? Who do you need? And over the next 2 to 3 months, at every staff meeting they have, I get them to one of them to fill that out, talk about it to their team for 10 minutes, and then have their team members ask questions and make observations about that individual. The reason I do that is it's a low-cost way for a team to keep the language going, to keep the conversation going around Grip-Birkman and creating the culture around language. And what I find is when I do that, and when teams do that, it really does set them up well for implementing this in a way that allows the effects to go on for a much longer time. Without that, within a few months, the team builds, it was just another exercise that their boss wanted them to do, and they've gone on to other things. So for me, having some sort of drip effect over the next 4 to 6 months with that kind of a tool, I've found just to be really helpful. So that's just a really quick walkthrough of what a half-day team build process looks like for me.
Wow. Greg, let me ask you a couple of questions before let me have some privilege to ask the first couple of questions.
Sure.
Number one, you're doing a half-day team build with these folks, and so you're able pretty much to just get through the lifestyle grid with that. Do you plan to do a follow-up with that? I mean, when you're doing a half-day team build, is that your only shot at them, or are you hoping to have several other opportunities with the same team?
Yeah, it's a great question. So 2 things. Ideally, what I like to do is plan another half day where I'll take it further. The thing is, in some of our contexts that we're working in here, getting people to commit even to one half day can be a challenge. So my feeling is if I can get in with a half day and get them interacting around their staff meetings with a follow-up tool, they end up calling me back. They want me to come back because they're realizing, okay, this was really helpful. This is helping us to address issues in our culture, issues on our team. We're seeing our team functioning in a healthier way. Can you help us to take this further? So I use the half day as a sell. If they're open to right off the beginning and want it, we'll do the full day. And that's where I'll typically walk into components in the afternoon and do some more teaching depending on what their needs are, because they need to understand the paradigms of the Grip-Birkman and not just the tool and not just understanding neat things about them.
Right. Yeah, that's a really great point about, being sure that you're focusing on the paradigms of Grip-Birkman and not just that wonderful, great tool that people want to jump on, the thing that they're least familiar with of the Birkman.
Absolutely. The other thing I do is when I meet with the senior leader of the team, what I will do is I will give them a binder that includes the gifts triangle, the coaches page, and the summary page. And I'll make notes on each of those for each of the team members so that they actually have something in writing as well.
Yeah.
And they can know, oh, here's how I could use this, right? So I'll say them things like, okay, if you're having one-on-one meetings with team members, before you meet with them, moving forward, take a look at their summary page, their gives triangle before you meet with them, so that you're thinking through the lens of who they are in your meeting and not just continuing in old patterns.
Good. Neil wants to know, would you please describe the tape grid exercise in more detail?
Absolutely. So I make it really simple. I've got 4 rolls of duct tape, red, green, yellow, blue, and I give them very simple verbal instructions. Go, set up the lifestyle grid according to the Birkman map, which is the new language, Birkman map, not lifestyle grid, and then just send them off. And sometimes, depending on the makeup of their team, it can be less than pretty. It may not be symmetrical. I've never had anyone get it wrong, like the wrong colors or anything, but that's the simple thing I do. It gets them going, gets them past some of their insecurities, uncertainties, because they're active. Once they have that set up, and we've done just a little debrief around what did you learn about your team as you were setting this up, strengths, weaknesses, observations about people, and we'll record those. Then I'll say, okay, I want you to stand in the lifestyle grid where your asterisk is. Now, in detail, what I typically do is there's a summary page of the lifestyle grids that has, I forget what page it is now. It has the asterisk, diamond, circle, square, all in one page with their descriptions for that person. I get that printed off ahead of time, and I have them hold it when they're in the lifestyle grids. Mm-hmm. When they're in the lifestyle grids, stating where their asterisk is, I typically ask 2 basic simple questions. First, what does this tell you about your team? And I just let them talk. What are some observations you would make about your team as you look at maybe things that are missing or people who aren't in certain places? And at this point in the asterisk, I'm just trying to get them thinking around what's missing, where people's standing, what implications there might be for how we're acting. And then I'll say something like, could you give me an example of how the strength of what you're seeing and the weakness of what you're seeing plays out maybe in your team context? And I'll let them talk. I let them do an awful lot of talking. I'll ask basic questions and then let them talk. And then we'll shift over into stand where your diamond is. And I'll ask the same questions again. I'm not overly creative with my questions typically because I'm not trying to make it complicated for people. I just want them to make observations, gain insights about their team, and then I'll bring some clarity in and some new insights. So say when they're standing where their diamond is, I'll bring in observations such as, which you learn in your training, how diamonds lead, right? So a red diamond typically leads through people. A green diamond leads with people. A blue diamond leads through a plan. A yellow diamond leads through a process. Like I'll bring that kind of information out and then say, oh, talk to me about one of your meetings. How has that played out for you? Is that going well? What are some of the challenges you're facing? I'll also bring out one other thing that we talk about in our training is cross quadrant is typically where there's the most conflict. So if I've got a red diamond and a blue diamond, we'll talk about, hey, do you guys ever experience tension in your relationship, in the working environment? And what I often do when I'm having that conversation with them is, those stretchy bands they use for physiotherapy?
Yeah.
I bring one of those and I have the person in the red hold one end, the person in the blue hold the other end, and I let them experience the tension, right? And so it's just a practical way where they're not only seeing where they're standing, but they're feeling a tension physically that's trying to model or demonstrate the internal tension that they feel. So I'll pull in that piece. And then again, we'll go to the circle, square, where they're standing there. But each time we shift, I'm also getting them to ask this question. what observations do you make about how your team changes as you move from the asterisk to the diamond, as you move from the diamond to the circle, right? Because I want them to understand the movement, the complexity of the team. Because if you just take the first, interest perspective, the team might say, oh, we're really unhealthy. We're unbalanced here. But then when you start seeing that, when they start seeing, oh, but when we stand where our diamond is, maybe places where there were gaps before in the asterisks, it's covered in how people usually operate. And so we'll talk about, well, what does that mean? What are the implications of that? So that's kind of how I walk that through. But there's one more piece that I bring in because I think I found this to be really important. The areas of interest that are unpacked in the 10 different areas, I like to have that on hand because what I found is sometimes people have areas of interest that aren't necessarily reflected in where their asterisk sits. So I was doing a team build with this one person and her asterisk was in the blue. And they said, well, she shouldn't be doing administrative things. You know, she's got a blue diamond, she's got a blue asterisk. Why would she be doing an administrative role in any way? And I said, well, let's take a look at her areas of interest scores. She has an 88 on clerical. So, and her asterisk was closer to the blue-yellow line, right? So sometimes having that extra little tool of areas of interest in your back pocket just helps to explain some nuances or details like that. Or again, if they're close to the line, they're going to borrow characteristics of that other quadrant. Because what I find is that so many people, what they do is, oh, you're a blue diamond. And they categorize people.
Yes.
They label them. And I'm fighting the entire time to help them to not do that by bringing out some of the complexities and helping them to see the relationship between this asterisk, diamond, circle, and square.
So Neil got most of his question, I think, clarified with you. This is on the floor, but Greg, you mentioned putting the four colored tape out there and letting the team actually build that grid on the floor, right? You don't lay it out for them.
No.
You let them lay the grid out and let them position themselves then for their first part of the exercise.
That's right.
Okay, so getting them to help with that grid for some of us when we're frantically trying to find that space for the lifestyle grid to do that floor exercise. Have you run into any problems having enough space in your meeting places to do that?
I've had that happen twice, and well, here's what I find: if I let them in their space do it, they will get very creative.
Mm-hmm.
So I wouldn't typically go into someone's office area and start stacking desks on top of each other. Like I wouldn't do that. But if it's their own space, they're far more creative. They'll move stuff out of the way. They'll make it happen.
Okay.
So, and part of that is, I tend not to be as directive, in my usual approach with things. So others, you might just find it really easy to walk in and go, okay, guys, I need those tables out of here. We're going to do this. I'm less comfortable, operating in that zone.
Okay. So if you've got a team, what would be a typical team size that you're looking at doing that?
The smallest team I've done it with is 4.
Okay.
The largest I've done it with was 14.
And with 14 people, what size space would you say you really need for that?
For the 14 people, I needed the smallest room I can really do it in is a 15 by 15. And that's pushing it. 15 by 15?
Yeah. Yeah, so you need a pretty large room for that.
Absolutely.
You ever have people doing things like going outside? I'm thinking like I had one team, we did it in a parking lot.
No, I haven't. I'd love to hear how that went. I've never done that.
It went really well. You have to be sure it's a parking lot that is not active. So, we don't have to constantly be moving out of the way for incoming traffic. But also we discovered what the bright sunlight in the summertime will do to that tape on the parking lot. Some interesting things. Now, you mentioned using duct tape. I found colored masking tape that I can order through Amazon, a little commercial here. It's 3M Expressions is the brand name, Expressions tape, and they do have the 4 colors. Usually you can get it in packages that will have the red, yellow, and green in a package, but not the blue. So we just use painter's tape for the blue. And by the way, I had to be sure that I found the painter's tape that doesn't have writing on the tape. But you can find it very easily at Lowe's or Home Depot or True Value or any hardware store just about. So you fill out the 4 colors that way. It's not cheap. Like I think about a package of 3 with the red, yellow, and green of the Expressions tape is $10 or $11. But I can usually get a couple of lifestyle grids the size that you're talking out of that. So you've got to have enough space to allow people to move around. And if you're letting them create that, then there are people that have a little bit more red and yellow in them will make sure that the grid looks nice.
Yeah, and some practical things too is really considering. So Tracy Lambert, one of our trainers, she did a team build yesterday outside, and she just had to make sure that like things like sunscreen, you're trying to minimize the distractions, and even things like the age of people. So when I'm working with an older team, I try to make the lifestyle grid big enough that they can actually sit in it with a chair, because after a while they just get tired of standing, to be honest. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It would have to be someone older than Steve Hoke, though. It's,
Yeah. You're muted, Steve, but if you want to make a comment, you're welcome to unmute yourself. In fact, for any of you that have other questions or comments for Greg, feel free to unmute yourselves and come in with those now.
I was thanking him for his age sensitivity.
I did this exercise a few weeks ago with a team where one of the team members was permanently on crutches. And the team was sensitive to that, and he wanted to stand through the beginnings of the exercise, but they were sensitive to that, and immediately someone went and got him a chair, and he just moved his chair with him as we went from place to place on the grid.
But it's, I think the thing that I've learned with the floor exercise is you don't want to rush it.
Yeah.
I did this with a church that was, it had gone through a lot of challenges, and honestly, it took us almost 3.5 hours to go through this exercise.
Wow.
We had people weeping, in the middle of the time. We had people confessing sin to one another and giving each other hugs. And like, you just never know what might break out, in doing this. If you give the space for people to talk and to process and not try to just shove them through a process.
Yeah.
You're creating space and environment for the Holy Spirit to do things as people are revealing who they are, insecurities, fears, past hurts, wounds. I had one team, we spent an hour and a half. We got into we just finished the diamond, our usual style. And someone said, we actually have never seen our team function in their usual healthy style because we've always seen the stress. That's always for the last 7 years, they said. They were completely shocked that this was their team's usual style. So, and again, that brought around some incredible health to this team by going through that exercise. So it's powerful, even though it's extremely simple. You don't have to make it complicated.
Good. Any other questions or comments you might want to make, or some other variations that you've done with some of these team building exercises, particularly a shorter one like Greg was describing just now?
I don't know if you can hear me or not.
Yes, we hear you fine, Carol. Go ahead.
Okay. I had the privilege of being with Greg and TL in a training session. And and I've also taken other classes, different types of coaching classes, but I just want to tell Greg how much I have appreciated and thought about what I learned during that time, and excited about being able to use that with other people, because like you said, Greg, I do think it can be very healing. And just in my individual discussions with people as we're building up to the first team building exercise that I'm going to have with our own church staff, it's been very powerful, and we have had moments of tears and lots of prayer, and it's been looking forward to the time where we're all together to discuss all of what God's done and is doing and will do with this team. So I just wanted to let you know, Greg, how much I appreciate you and how sensitive you are to the Spirit as you lead others through this. Thank you so much.
Well, you're very welcome. You know, I really do believe that we lead out of our own transformation. And so these kind of exercises, they're transformational in the lives of individuals and therefore in the life of a team. So glad that was a positive experience for you, Carol.
Thank you, Carol. Thank you. Greg, Ken would like to know a little bit more about how you're about dealing with the leader's circle, his circle square, with his need and his stress, as compared to the team's diamond.
Okay. So with the different team builds I've done, every leader is different. But what I've realized is the prep work ahead of time with the leader is very important. You know, in the context I've been working in with senior pastors, board chairs, etc., there's kind of this expectation that they shouldn't have needs and that they should be kind of have it all together. So this can become a really vulnerable place. So prepping the leader ahead of time, talking about that God created us with needs and our significance. Those are all really important preparatory conversations for in the lifestyle grid, where the leader who what I find is in a lot of churches, the typical pattern would be a leader of a church, pastor, has a circle in the blue. That would be the dominant pattern that I've been seeing over the last 5 or 6 years. You know, they may have a diamond in the reds or a diamond in the green, or sometimes in the yellow even, but often their circle, their need and stress responses are in the blue. So, but, you know, maybe I need to ask just one clarifying question. Ken, what are you asking with the team's diamonds to the leader's circle or needs? Is it like, how does the team meet the leader's needs?
No, where I think I was going with trying to understand, when you put a leader in the circle square, the team leader, and then put everybody else in their diamond, there's got to be some natural interaction about why would I as a leader choose these people? What are my needs that all those people's diamonds somehow automatically connect with me, and how that the kind of dialogue that opens.
So you're thinking in terms of the team's diamond being in the same quadrant as the leader's circle with their need.
If they are, what's the significance of that? If they aren't, what's the significance of that?
Oh, deep question, Greg. That's a good one for you.
Great question. You know, typically, just like in an introductory exercise like this, we've rarely gotten to that kind of a depth.
Yeah.
You know, it's definitely a much more nuanced question, but I think it's a helpful one, right? So those are the kind of coaching questions that I would probably have on the sidebar, Ken, where it's, let's look at your team, because, you know, here's where your team is out on their lifestyle grids. What does this tell you about you? What's driving you in your hiring process? Are Are you thinking through things strategically for the organization, or are you making decisions based upon your own personal needs? Right. So maybe an example of this, Ken, would be I did this team build with this one church. It had staff of about 6 or 7, and the leader he had his fundamental need to have his team function in the red and the green. He wanted all of his top leaders, all of his staff, to be in that space because he wanted and had this philosophical understanding that, Bill Hybels at some leadership summit years ago said, if you're an 8, you can't lead a 9. And so his perception was that if you've got people in the blue and the yellow, they're not going to be able to lead people who are reds and greens, right? And so his whole thing was, how do I move them up? So what that did was it helped us to help him with understanding you can't change people, but people can shift, intentionally outside of themselves for a short period of time, but they will always come back to their natural state. So if you're a yellow diamond, a blue diamond, you might be able to move up, say empowered by the Holy Spirit, if you have a gift of leadership or pastoring or prophecy or something that moves you up, but you will always come back down to the place of rest, which is your maybe blue or yellow diamond. So again, it's sometimes just helping pastors to understand how their frames of reference are maybe incorrect or not helpful in mobilizing people, which then opens up the door for, in that situation, why are you trying to change people? Right? So what is the system of thinking, the mindset, or some even theology for some people that's driving this for you? And for this individual, it was just this one statement that Bill Hybels made that he could not let go of. He wanted everyone in his organization to be an 8 or 9 leader because he felt like if that was there, and if they were all reds and greens, they would really drive this organization forward. Now, in that case, just so you know, that leader never really backed off of that.
Wow.
And that was 6 years ago now, and his team continues to struggle because he doesn't accept them for who they are.
Wow.
So it's not always wonderful stories.
Yeah. Is that helpful, Ken? I see your head going up and down, yes. Did I see any hand? I was looking for hands raised. You can, I think, right-click by your name if you look at the participants.
So
Steve
and then Tim.
And I see Tim.
Steve Hope.
Steve, there you go, Steve.
So let my wise brother go first.
The hokey sign.
2 things. One, just an affirmation for Greg. I imagine all of us that have even done 1, 2, and 3 day team builds have erred on the side is that we don't give adequate time to the power of that places please exercise. I mean, typically I do it an hour and move on just because the schedule dictates it. And you're right, that's easily worth 2 or 3 hours if it's set up, or 1, 2, or 3 hours. And a team that's really functioning together, it really deserves that time. So I really appreciate hearing it. I have never taken that long, but probably wanted to. Here's my question.
Yeah.
It sounds like you often are getting to get into issues dealing with lifestyle grid, when in fact the issue is what's playing out on the team is their giftedness, not just their natural abilities. But if you haven't gone there, so how do you deal with that? Obviously, it sets it up, but is that something you just hold and talk to the leader about, like, see, I told you? Or do you begin to talk about gifting there and just sort of hook them for a subsequent conversation?
Yeah.
Great question there, Steve. Great.
Question. It will vary. So I will always at some point, if we have time, I'll take it more fulsomely. But I will also always say, okay, your diamond will move based upon your gifts. So, some teams, they're very aware of that. And so it'll be more just a part of the ongoing conversation. For others, it's got to be a separate thing. So I've done some where we've come back, we've done another floor exercise at another day just because I want them fresh. And we'll just go into the diamond and we'll just talk about movement and the power of the Holy Spirit. And again, for me, when I'm doing this, yes, I am taking the movement of support gifts down, the movement of equipping gifts up. But we are also talking about what hinders us from, paying attention to the voice of the Spirit. What do we believe theologically about the Holy Spirit? So I typically do my teaching in the context of an exercise more than a classroom, but that's just personal preference in my wiring. Some of you are really gifted teachers in a more formal setting, and so you might do that outside of that, which is great. But I've always, at some point, it's either in the lifestyle grid as a hook or afterwards bringing in the spiritual gift, because without that, you're right, Tim or Steve, they don't catch the fullness of what happens here in their life, and what's happening on their team. I had this one lady who was a blue diamond with a gift of prophecy and a gift of faith. And her team didn't understand, well, if she's way down in the blue, how can she stand in front of the congregation sometimes and give these prophetic words? Well, it's because of gift of prophecy and a gift of faith. So prophecy moves her up, more towards direct. The gift of faith extends that. It puts her way, way more direct than anyone would ever imagine this woman going. So there'd be an example of, in a lifestyle grid exercise, a question comes out, I'll go directly to that. But I may not do that for everyone's gifts.
Tim, you have another question or comment?
Well, first of all, good job, Greg. I hope that you have this all written down so you can easily put it on the coach's resource page, because the way you've laid out the steps is very helpful. And I find that having them take their profile and read the Birkman words is just the beginning of the dialogue, because Birkman's usually pretty concise, not always as helpful as possible. So getting them to talk and using their own words is great. The other side of this for me, following up on what Sensei just said, was that I'd say if I only could do two things with a group, a team, I would do the lifestyle grid exercise and the team styles on the spiritual gift side. So I've begun doing a very simple exercise on a flip chart, and across the top, it just has, I write the name of the team, and then I have four team styles. Let's go, let me help you, let's stay together, let's be careful. About 2/3 of the way down the page, I write the word needs, and then the same thing across, same four team styles across the bottom. Then they put their initials under each one of their team styles, strengths and needs, and we have the whole team able to see each other according to their team styles, and then have a similar conversation. So what do you see about our team? Where are we strong? Where are we weak? And let them talk to each other about how they're going to work together most effectively. How is this going to influence the way we think about developing our ministry strategy based on this type of stuff? It's it's been very useful for team dialogue. And then I developed a one-page Let's Be Team thing that takes the Birkman foursome and the spiritual gifts triangle and just invites them with coaching questions to kind of do an overall conversation about themselves as a team in light of those natural and supernatural things. So anything that we can develop that we can put up in a simple 1 or 2 page thing that the rest of us can use. I love that stuff. So I can't wait for you to put that steps to a half day, 1 day team building part. The other question I would ask, Greg, is anywhere from 4 to 14. If you're doing 1.5 to 2 hours of personal coaching and you've got 14 people ahead of time, that's an awful lot of time. So how have you found that to work best?
So
Great question. Yeah.
I logistically, the larger teams, here's what with that one team of 14, what I did is I actually had trained coaches from that church, and I got them to do the individual coaching sessions in that situation. But I do charge for these team builds, and you know, in our context, you know, my base price. So if I'm going to do this, last one I did was a team of 6. It was $250 per person for an hour-and-a-half session and their assessment. Those are Canadian dollars, you know, so at the exchange for a component report, I'm paying about $105 right now for the component report. And then for half-day team build, it's between $400 and $500, and for a full day, it's between, you know, $800 and $1,000. Mm-hmm. And so I'm getting paid to do this, so I'm going to take the time, because what I don't want to do is I don't want to short circuit the individual coaching sessions, because what I find those individual coaching sessions do is they, one, help me to understand what's the undercurrent here for each team member, and that's really important for me to know in the team build. It helps me to address their concerns and their fears, and it also helps me to understand theologically what things do I need to hit on the paradigms, either directly or indirectly, for them to really get the foundation they need. So there's a whole lot that's happening in that individual coaching session that goes far beyond just, do they understand who they are more fully? I'm gleaning a ton of information that's prepping me. So this last one we did, here's one of the undercurrents that we picked up by doing the 6 coaching sessions. None of the team is telling their boss the truth about how they're feeling. Mm-hmm. No one is. They have a culture of let's be nice and let's, you know, but let's not be honest. And it's killing them one day at a time. And we wouldn't have known that if we didn't do the individual coaching sessions, because it would never have come out in a group coaching exercise. So there's undercurrents with teams that if you don't identify it, you can go through the team builds, but if people aren't going to be honest, you still have the stuff under the rug, the elephant in the room, whatever image you want to use.
Shannon says that when he's doing larger teams, he's recruited coaches to help with the one-on-one coaching and made sure that the coaches had an outline to follow, so we all covered the same areas in the same order.
That's great, Shannon. And the thing I love about what you're saying, Shannon, is if this is going to work well, you need to have someone on that team that stays in the context. It's the keeper of the paradigms. It's the keeper of the Grip-Birkman culture to keep driving it in. Because it's what I found is where we haven't had that over, that's actually not that long of a time, whatever room you gained or ground you gained with that team build, it easily get lost in the busyness of Sunday mornings or ministry or business, whatever you're working with, this busyness. So having someone there that's continually pushing forward the values is going to be extremely important. And a trained coach, I think that's the best route. So where do you go, Shannon?
Yeah, Tim says to everybody, I've developed a Grip-Birkman coaching guideline that can be used by coaches for consistency and easier access to the Grip-Birkman materials we coach around. So thanks for that, Tim. Constantly.
Tim and Steve, you know, historically have developed a ton of resources that are still available online at the grip-birkman.com website. So I would encourage you to go into those places. There's still some great resources there. We are going to be trying to clean that up a little bit more, try to update it with the new language of the new reports that are going to be coming in the fall. But the content that Tim and Steve, especially in the past, have developed, it's really solid. So I would encourage you to go look at it.
Yeah.
So just a question at that point. I think we all know how to get onto the coach's resource part of the page, and the password has changed. So there's a new password. We're living in 2017 now, which is nice. But if you have a resource you want to add to the page, or at least have somebody review before being added to the page? What is the process for that?
Greg, did we finalize that, Greg and Ken? Ken, how about helping to kick into that, because you guys were in discussions about that just this past week.
Yeah, so there's a ton of changes that are going on right now. And one of the things that John Blake is taking the lead on helping us to get it organized. At this point, those resources would be sent to John Blake. But everyone on the leadership team is going to be taking responsibility for updating all the resources. And when I say updating, we just have some language changes. You know, we still have some documents that use this phrase GBB, Grip-Birkman Blueprint, which we don't use anymore. So we want to take out those things that are just confusing or not accurate. Even simple things like Grip-Birkman, it actually has a dash in there, right? So we want to make sure that that's consistent. But for right now, if you have new resources, send them to John Blake. His email address is on the website, and John will make sure that gets looked after.
Greg, thank you so much for these ideas about team building and the possibility of a half-day team build that some perhaps had not thought would be possible. And thank you guys, those of you that had questions and comments. Thank you for participating. Next month, we will be right back here again. We'll be talking about some of the other issues that you're facing. And by the way, if you have something specific you would like for us to address on the Grip-Birkman Coaches Cafe, my email address is on the website, as is Greg's. If you would send me or Greg or Jay Jarbo, if you would send us your suggestion or your questions that you would like for us to address in a future Coaches Cafe, we'll be sure to get to that. And of course, if you have other questions, there is going to be, we'll be announcing very soon an email address that is support for Grip-Birkman, where you'll be able to send those questions to that one address, and it will get to someone who will answer your questions. The email address is up already, but we're not quite ready to announce it. We want to be sure we've got people in place that can begin to answer your questions. But be watching for that, and the bridge also for that new support address that you'll be able to write with questions or comments related to your experience with Grip-Birkman. Thank you, everyone. Lord bless you very much. Go out there and help to build unity in the body of Christ so that more people will come to know Jesus.